Preface: the human world, the underworld, the celestial world. These three worlds strive to maintain balance, but over time, this world crumbled. They had a chance to escape, but God Arlen sensed some kind of trickery. In that very instant, Master Buddha began to attack the heavenly realm. Torment would finally end, but suddenly, threads began to wrap around Bamin's leg. He was soon completely secured by these threads to the... Landing softly on the ground, he saw something very strange in front of him. Before him was a sexy nurse asking Bamin not to do it again. The threads that had saved Bamin were embedded in his hand. The nurse immediately approached Bamin and put her hand on his cheek, saying at the same time that if Bamin died, it would be a shame. Xiaotian sensed some kind of deception and was confused by the scent emanating from the girl. And at the same time, instantly, the nurse's mouth transformed into something horrible. It looked like she was going to eat Bamin. Bamin reacted immediately and jumped to the side, yelling at Xiaotian to use the scissors to defend himself. Bamin didn't understand Xiaotian and simply held the nurse's head between his legs. Xiaotian watched all this and congratulated Bamin on groping the nurse's butt. It turned out that Bamin wasn't groping the nurse, but holding on to. The technique didn't work, and the nurse sank her teeth into Ego's stomach. Confused, Xiaotian turned to Bamin and said what he wanted to say. It was Bamin who needed to stab the nurse with real scissors, not make scissor shapes with his feet. In fact, the real scissors were right next to Bamin, but he never grabbed them. Instead, he kicked the nurse's leg with all his might, but it didn't affect her at all, and she called Bamin little brother. God Arlen immediately activated his defense, opening the third eye on his forehead, an ability that further amplified his power. Xiaotian cautioned him not to be so disobedient. Raising her head, she told Bamin that she would make him feel good and began to choke him. Bamin was grabbing her butt at that moment. The spikes that had emerged from his rear, Bamin couldn't endure it any longer. He remembered that he wanted to die anyway, so why was he resisting? He released her hands. Xiaotian was not pleased with this, knowing that if Bamin were to die, he would also perish. Xiaotian demanded the nurse release the child, and he called her a little girl. And how dare she touch his prey? Turning around, he recognized Xiaotian. Xiaotian was outraged, since the beast girl knew who he was, yet she still dared to act in such a repulsive way. She laughed in response, and said that no one in the world considered Xiaotian to be a great demon anymore. These words, they enraged Xiaotian, and he pounced on the girl, but much to his surprise, he passed right through her. He didn't understand why his attacks were ineffective. I think that it was because of Bamin. The monster girl laughed again, saying she wasn't stupid enough to come unprepared. She added that Xiaotian would be too stupid if he still hadn't realized that he was losing his demonic power because of this boy. She was worried, as she might lose all of her strength. The girl continued sitting on top of Bamin and laughed. Xiaotian couldn't believe that his great name was being tarnished by this loser and lecherous demon, Bamin. He woke up and thought he was already in heaven when he saw a woman's breasts in front of him, but his pleasant sensations quickly dissipated when he hard on him. But Arlen remained determined and pointed his spear directly at Master Buddha. But when he stabbed the demon who was impersonating Buddha, realized that he was still alive. He asked to be fed as soon as possible, and the nurse told him not to worry, that she would take care of it. But suddenly, someone threw an apple at him. It was Jer. He came to visit Bamin, and this is what happened. Bamin was angry here. Bamin was filled with happiness when he realized that, in reality, the dog hadn't eaten it. It turned out that the stinky dog, Setian, had just lied to Bamin. Jer got very angry when he saw this and started throwing apples at Bamin and the nurse. The nurse didn't want to leave any witnesses and immediately rushed towards Jer. The nurse got quite close, and Jer still didn't understand what was happening. Without thinking much about it, he kicked the nurse in the back of the neck with his foot, sending her flying to the side. The nurse liked Jer's punch and praised her for having so much strength, but she still wasn't going to let her go, telling her that she wouldn't get away with it again. The nurse transformed into her final form, resembling a spider. The nurse immediately began attacking Jer. At that moment, Bamin was sitting on the ground and shouted for Jer to run away. But it was already too late. Jer was pushed against the wall as threads began to wrap around his neck, choking and lifting Jer. The nurse declared that she was about to kill him, but then Bamin came running and began stabbing the nurse's tentacle with a pair of scissors. She turned her head and looked at him, telling Bamin to shut up. At that very instant, her tentacle pierced Bamin's chest. Spear was stopped by something within. Xiaotian yelled at him to be extremely careful because this spirit was a strange one, and potentially more. Watched everything, drowning in his own blood. Tears streamed down Jer's face. The nurse told Bamin that he was fine, that she hadn't touched anything vital, an important organ that wouldn't die so easily. All Bamin felt was pain, helplessness, anger, humiliation, regret, and persistence. Xiaotian. He quickly ran to Bamin and asked if he finally had the will to survive, if he still wanted to live. Xiaotian had a suggestion for Bamin. After saying those words, Bamin found himself in a place that seemed like hell to him. He stood there wondering why everything was always coming for him, always up his ass. He also didn't realize if he was alive or dead. Xiaotian, who was also in this place, accused Bamin of not valuing his life at all. Even an insect constantly tries to survive. He called Bamin pathetic. Bamin retorted that Xiaotian couldn't understand his pain. Xiaotian retorted that he didn't need to understand anything and wasn't interested, then stated that Bamin wasn't actually in hell, but in his mind. Approaching him, Xiaotian stated an important fact. Their lives and deaths are interconnected, and Bamin can't let things go. Bamin replied that Xiaotian was very unlucky then. Xiaotian continued, saying that if they joined together, the entire world would be under their control. But Bamin, he responded that he wasn't going to endanger the world. Xiaotian became angry because this brat rejected his proposal. To this, Bamin replied that he shouldn't even dangerous than he realized. Just then, the Buddha statue began to devour everything in its path. At that moment, Arlen excitedly gripped the spear and should try to intimidate him. They will never cooperate, Bamin said, with a mocking smile, that Xiaotian still had to obey him. Sitian realized that there was no choice but to obey that brat in order to survive. They had reached an agreement, but Bamin didn't understand why he had agreed so quickly. To which Xiaotian replied that there was no time to waste. We are back at the hospital. At this moment, Bamin was lying on the ground, and he was emitting demonic power. The nurse didn't understand what was happening. Bamin pushed the nurse's claw away with his hand, saying that no one dared to touch Yi. He grabbed the nurse by the head and started hitting her with all his strength. Bamin was holding Yi in his arms. Turning his head, he looked at his hand and wondered how such a simple blow could have so much force. He turned to Yi and asked him to leave so he could take care of the offending party. She responded that he was injured, pulling a huge piece of claw out of his body. Bamin dismissed it, saying it was just a scratch. This action angered Yi, as, who couldn't get the claw out, he could die from blood loss. She was very afraid of losing Bamin. Bamin stood there with the claw in his hands, not knowing what to do. He considered returning it to calm Yi, but Xiaotian forbade him from doing so. There was no need, since Xiaotian's demonic powers had already stopped the bleeding. Bamin looked at the wound. It had indeed healed. Xiaotian smiled and told Bamin that was only a fraction of the power, realized his strength was failing him, and he would soon be consumed. Xiaotian couldn't bear to see him like that, and warned the demon that he would tear him to pieces, of which he was capable, and that to unleash its full potential, the protagonist had to obey. With a serious expression, Bamin asked Xiaotian what he had been barking about. Xiaotian was simply joking. Xiaotian turned around and said, "You have to be patient until I recover and break the spiritual seal, then you will be definitely absorbed, you snot-nosed brat." The spirit seal was right in front of them. Bamin smashed it to pieces with a single punch. At that moment, the nurse, he regained consciousness. He realized that if he ate Bamin now, he would become the strongest demon. But Bamin thought otherwise, and with a forta scream, urging him to eat his stinky paws, he punched him in the stomach. Then he shoved his own paw into her mouth, planted his feet on the ground as firmly as he could, and was able to hit her as hard as possible, knocking down a wall in the process. He looked at his new hand. He couldn't believe how much power it held. He jumped for joy, muttering to himself that he could finally teach that bastard a lesson for hurting Jer. But Xiaonan yelled at him to stop. Turning his head, he saw a spider web in front of him. Bamin looked at it and saw the stones flying through the cut in the web. He hadn't realized it was so sharp. He grabbed his head and realized he had almost fallen into a trap. After spitting out the paw, the nurse became very sad that Bamin didn't fall into his trap. He suggested that he lie down and wait to die. Hearing these words, Bamin responded that he was no longer the child he used to be, and that he was unstoppable now. If he didn't let Arlen go, but Arlen told Xiaotian not to come any closer, as it was too late to do anything. He understood the mission of these demons. With a contorted face, the nurse scolded Bamin, telling him not to pretend to be almighty just because of Tiangeu's strength. But at the same time, instantly, Bamin grabbed the spiderweb and tore it off. The nurse couldn't believe how he had done it. Her web was woven from the simplest celestial threads. Some people on the floor heard a noise coming from the 10th floor. They urgently called security. The nurse panicked, because in order to keep living as a human, she couldn't let them see her true form. Bauman stood in front of her and asked her if she wanted to devour him. Why was she hesitating? Was she scared or something? Reincarnating back into the form of a nurse, she told Bauman not to get excited too soon, as she had attracted many demons with her. Increased demonic powers, warning him of a greater danger. Then she scattered and jumped out the window. Bauman was puzzled and asked Xiaotian if he was telling the truth. Xiaotian replied that he was lying, pointing out that many demons had lived in the human world since ancient times. Xiaotian and Bauman continued talking about the consequences, and at that moment, the guards to whom Jer was trying to explain something had already rushed in. At that time, Xiaotian explained that, although he had lost 90% of his strength, it would be more than enough to defeat the earth demons. Xiaotian also sensed some kind of trap in what was happening and had a bad feeling about it. Bauman called Iodian a stinky dog and asked him why he lied about eating Jer. He was interested. He also realized that the gods could not defeat the demons. He then told Xiaotian that he had a mission for him. Xiaotian replied that he didn't think in what really happened. Xiaotian asked for a little respect, because he doesn't like being addressed like that. But even so, Xiaotian recounted what happened. At that moment, terrified, she prayed for Bauman to awaken. He was prepared to devour her, but Yer, remaining composed, struck Bauman directly in the coconut, with such force that it cracked. In pain, he collapsed to the ground, and Xiaotian inquired if Bauman was satisfied with what he had heard, to which Bauman responded, yes. In Night City, Bauman stood on the building's rooftop, contemplating that the dog's strength wasn't very dependable. He wanted to observe the extent of his body's improvement. He activated his auditory superpowers. He could now hear events occurring several blocks away, which greatly pleased him. Meanwhile, Xiaotian felt a little, because they were wasting time. He turned to Bauman, questioning what the next step was, revealing his distrust. Bauman responded that every hero must. Testing his superpowers. Glancing towards Bauman, he realized something. Xiaotian ran up to him, asking where he was going while staring intently. It turns out that Bai was watching a girl showering in her bathroom. They seemed to be really enjoying the show. Well, the girl seemed to sense their leering gazes and turned around, startling Bauman. As they crouched down, Xiaotian questioned why they were worrying since they were far away, so obviously she couldn't see them. Bauman responded that his sixth sense told him that they were being watched. After saying that, Bauman suggested testing other powers. He climbed onto the railing. That Arlen was such a coward. If he can't kill him, Xiaotian will. But Arlen told him to listen carefully, saying, maybe you can. Prepared to jump, Dan yelled, you idiot, what are you doing? Xiaotian tried to stop him, but naturally his words had no effect, and Bauman jumped. He dragged Oan with him as he flew. Bauman realized that his hearing was so keen that he could even hear the conversations of passers-by. At that very second, he was already hooked, his hand gripping the flashlight handle. He skillfully executed a somersault and landed abruptly on his feet, right in front of a couple in love. Xiaotian, for his part, simply collapsed to the ground. It turned out that the woman walking with her man was very scared, and she clung to her suitor. The man wasn't going to let it go and scolded Bauman for scaring his wife. But instead of apologizing, Bauman turned around and told him he could call him Lantern Man. The man recognized Bauman as one of his students and remembered that the boy was disabled. Bauman also found it very familiar. He had definitely seen her somewhere in the school, and then it hit him. She's the school teacher. Bauman started to sweat, not understanding what the teacher was doing here. He wondered if the teacher had seen his ability. But then Bauman noticed a girl who didn't resemble the teacher. So, who was this woman? When Bauman raised his hand, he caught a strange scent. The professor and his companion looked at him, not understanding what he was doing or why. He sniffed his armpit. Bauman realized that the smell was coming from the woman, and he approached them, greeting them. At that moment, the teacher was a little, fight against him, because you do not have the power of God within you, because you are a demon that I found on earth, and took with me to heavenly territory. And at this, scared, since he didn't want anyone to know about his relationship with that woman. When Bauman approached them, he turned to his master and told him that his woman smelled. To another man, he must have been deceiving you, or he was deceived himself. These words greatly angered both the woman and Master Bauman. There must have been. I made a mistake. I had no way of knowing that the scent was the smell of something burning. Meanwhile, the girl had already left the master behind. When the completed Teacher turned to scold Bamin. He was already gone. At that moment, a taxi was speeding towards the crowd at a dizzying, breakneck pace. There were two guys in the car who panicked and whose brakes jammed, so they didn't brake in time, crashing into a concrete wall. The impact caused the car to fly upwards, directly over the crowd. At that moment, something incredibly fast shot across the street. It was Bamin, who had stolen a dog hoof, who came from somewhere, ran as fast as he could. A second later, he was right in front of the car, activating his super strength ability, and then he had no trouble catching the falling car with his bare hands. Soon, the car was safely on the ground, the danger averted, but such a spectacle shocked the people both on the street and inside the car. Ripping the car door off, Bamin asked the passengers if they were all right. After Bamin saved the people on the street, he immediately fled the scene, but everything was being observed by a strange man who was recording it all with his phone. Faced with the emergence of all sorts of dangers, Hong Tong's mysterious dark force spread through the clear skies of the celestial world like a plague. Arlen decided to break the seal that had been placed upon Xiaotian. Xiaotian didn't understand what was happening and asked, "Is this a huge power?" Insidious smile was already alarming to see. The next day at school, Bamin walked through the courtyard. Behind him, two boys were whispering that our protagonist used to be the center of attention and popularity, ever since he was the captain of the basketball team. Two other boys speculated that Bamin's absence and his departure from the sports school had caused the team's performance to drop significantly. They felt sorry for Bamin. One of the boys asked them to speak a little more quietly, because Bamin might hear them talking. Their gossip was being observed by Xiaotian. Bamin asked what he was looking at. Xiaotian replied, "If you're ignoring their conversation, it looks like you broke your arms and legs on purpose." The enraged Bamin turned toward Xiaotian and offered to let him experience what it was like to be fearful. Xiaotian refused, replying that he was just curious. Bamin told him to shut up, as if Aotian was the only one who could see Bamin. Their conversation seemed very strange, and the boys nearby thought Bamin had suddenly gone crazy. Yuer was behind him and asked, "What are you guys chatting about here?" The boys were about to run away from that cruel woman. Furthermore, they said that all Bamin could do was hide behind a woman's skirt. Xiaotian became angry upon hearing those words and suggested that Bamin kill those idiots. Bamin replied, "They might be right about something. Let's just let them run away." Xiaotian replied that his heart was too kind. Jie ran over, and demonic, and overjoyed to be freed from the seal, finally ending his torment. Out of nowhere, a huge fist appeared above him. Bamin gave Aotian a very rude expression. She was stunned because she couldn't see the dog, so she thought he was talking to her directly. Immediately, he apologized, saying he wasn't the one who told her. Jer missed this incident and asked where he got his super strength, the one that hurts him, and perhaps he needs to go to the hospital. The protagonist responded, telling him not to worry and that he was fine. He didn't know how to explain where that power came from, so he just smiled. A few days later, on the day of the exam, Bamin and Xiaotian were walking down the road, arguing as usual. Xiaotian was annoyed that Gemin didn't respect his elders. Xiaotian has lived for 100,000 years, after which Xiaotian pulled the chain with a lot of force. He approached the table where the high school students' grades were displayed. The top spot was once again taken by a tough guy named Mu, who, it is said that he has a good figure and is handsome, possessing all the potential to be number one. Xiaotian asked where Bamin's name was located, and he was told that it was bottom right. This made Oan laugh heartily, and he chided Bamin for always being last. Turning towards Oyan, Bamin retorted that everything was his fault. Ever since he was hospitalized on the day of the exam, his grades had all been 0. Xiaotian inquired that, if he hadn't been hospitalized, in what place would he have ranked? He answered that he would have been in first place. Xiaotian was shocked by this certainty. The crowd immediately began to ridicule him. The teacher, Xiaotian, sealed him into the ground. This action opened a portal in the ground, and Xiaotian flew into it like a bullet. Finally, Arlen said, "This may be the," appears out of nowhere, and tells Bamin to follow him. Bamin approached the teacher. The teacher asked Bamin to forget about the incident from the previous night, and the change would help him pass the exams. Bowing his head to the teacher, Bamin thanked him, though he had always known that the teacher wanted to kick him out of school more than anyone else. He didn't understand why he was pretending now. The protagonist stood up straight and, looking at Bamin's back, as he walked away, said that he had to go to class. The teacher was thinking that, when all of this was over, he would sooner or later find a way to expel him from the school. And, Then Xiaotian appeared with a question. Why is Bamin so worried about staying in this school? Wouldn't it be better to just use his demonic power and conquer the world? To these words, Bamin responded that school isn't just a place to learn. Furthermore, Bamin delivered an impressive speech. Motivation. Xiaotian liked his answer and commented that the kid was stronger than he had initially thought. Later that day, in the professor's office, the professor, Sexy, asked Bamin why he hadn't come to class the other day, inquiring, "Is it because of what happened recently?" He replied flirtatiously that it was, and added that he was feeling better now, but Xiaotian suspected something was amiss when the professor once again expressed her support for Bamin. Xiaotian finally realized that Bamin had only come to the school to ogle the sexy professor. Xiaotian concluded that Bamin might be experiencing estrus, or at the very least, a strong desire to mate, the dog. Only solution. Xiaotian, expending his last bit of strength, as Arlen believed that Xiaotian could change the future and that he absolutely had to fix things, sensed a strange scent emanating from the teacher and approached to investigate what was attracting Bamin. Bamin became angry at these actions and demanded some respect for him. The professor immediately stood up and handed Bamin a document, which turned out to be a request for re-examination. The professor believed in Bamin and asked him not to embarrass her. When Bamin left the study, he reprimanded Xiaoyan, stating that his action was unacceptable. But Xiaotian interrupted and told him that if Bamin was interested in that professor, he should be careful because he sensed anger emanating from her. Bamin suggested she might be a demon, but Xiaotian refuted that, saying she is a simple person, but it's as if she is surrounded by some kind of evil spirit. Bamin has a dream. He doesn't know where he is, and suddenly, a terrifying monster appears above him. Bamin doesn't know what to do or where to go. And at that very second, the scene around of Bamin, as he shifted, a car's headlights shone directly at him. He didn't know what was happening. The car was getting closer and closer. It turned out to be him and his mother, dead in the car. Bamin's eyes widened. The next thing he saw was an extremely bright light. He finally woke up, breathless with excitement, and gasped for air. Turns out he had gone to class and fallen asleep right before the exam. I've been having the strangest dreams lately, he realized. Many crows were outside the window, cawing restlessly. He looked out the window and didn't understand the feeling he had. It was anxiety about the exams, the teacher, infiltrating the human world. We see a boy who somehow managed to fall into the water. He thought there was no salvation left, that his life had entered the class. Bamin was surprised to see him. The teacher, looking angry, slammed his hand on the table and said, "I supervise all 6 subjects you're reviewing. I will personally supervise, so don't even think about cheating." The professor also added that if he caught anyone cheating, their results would be invalidated immediately. He also added that if he failed, he shouldn't blame the professor for not giving him another chance. Bamin, like a child, exclaimed that he wouldn't let anyone down. Nobody. Slapping the table, the teacher announced that Bamin could begin. The timer on the clock has started. Bamin began to curse under his breath as he wrestled with the formulas, but he still continued working on the exam. The professor sat directly in front of Bamin to prevent any cheating on his part. There was hardly any time remaining. The birds outside the window began to act very aggressively, making a lot of noise and preventing Bamin from concentrating. Suddenly, at one point, a loud crash was heard. Throughout the entire class, it turned out that the crow had struck the window with such force that it shattered. Terrified, B then watched the bird fall, leaving behind only a hole in the window. He turned to the teacher and asked, in a serious tone, if he sensed that something was amiss. The teacher ordered Bamin to cease the ride, nonsense, and stop playing pranks. Even if the building were to collapse today, Bamin would still be sitting in front of the teacher, taking the exam. At that very moment, the building began to shake violently. Bamin and the teacher were both bewildered, unable to understand what was happening. The earthquake had truly begun. Over the school's loudspeakers, finished. He didn't have much desire to live, not since the person he loved most was gone. That person was his mother, whom he loved very much. A car accident. An announcement blared that the gymnasium building had collapsed due to unknown causes and that the school was taking all necessary measures. Possible rescue measures were being discussed. Teachers and students were asked to remain calm and not give in to panic. After hearing this, the teacher repeated that something had occurred in the gymnasium. Bamin pointed to the door and asked the teacher if he was going to check out what was happening. The teacher replied that he wasn't. There was no reason to panic, and he ordered Bamin to finish the exam quickly. He stated that he would go to the gym after the exam. Bamin considered the fact that the Teacher was really going out of his way to make things difficult for him, but suddenly, a wave of coldness swept through the office. Bamin was alarmed by this, especially since it was summer outside. And then he remembers, gets up from his seat, and says that Jer is in the gym right now and must be in danger. He asked Bamin what he planned to do now that he wanted to leave, glanced at the blank answer sheet, and emphasized to Bamin not to blame him if he, as he had warned him, if he submitted a blank form, Bamin would be permanently expelled. Bamin, unfazed, pointed to the zeros on the ground, asking if he had lost them. Lost, the teacher replied, let me see, and added that Bamin shouldn't make fun of him like that. Bamin managed to divert the teacher's attention and shot a piece of eraser like a bullet, but when the teacher realized he was just being distracted, he threatened Bamin with expulsion again. It took his life, his car flew off a cliff, and Bamin lost an arm and a leg in the accident. Mom couldn't be saved and tragically died. With expulsion, but it was too late. A piece of eraser was already heading toward the back of his head. At that very moment, a piece of eraser crashed at lightning speed, striking the guru right in the back of the neck. The blow was so powerful that the teacher lost consciousness, and Bamin. He picked him up in his arms and apologized profusely. After settling the teacher into a chair, Bamin dashed out of the classroom. As for the exams, he left his future to fate. His future hung in the balance. When he rushed into the hallway, he was met with a horrifying sight. The entire corridor was coated in a red, blood-like sweat. He watched as they began to form strange shapes on the floor. More and more, these figures started to resemble the form of a human body. In just a few seconds, these monsters were already standing upright in front of Bamin. The outraged Bamin realized that these monsters were responsible for what had happened in the gym and demanded that they step aside. Quickly getting out of their way, he didn't have time to waste on the monsters. One of the monsters wondered what the hell he was talking about. Bamin called out to Xiaotian. Bamin, in turn, called Xiaotian a stinky dog and expressed his displeasure, saying he had been waiting for a long time. Xiaotian responded that he was busy looking for answers for the test. Bamin said that the exam was no longer important and that monsters had broken into the school. Turning towards the monsters, they had already disappeared. Bamin thought they must have fled. Xiaotian said that the monsters were no longer important and told him to look out the window. But suddenly, someone's hands appeared in the water. He was pulled by his life preserver and dragged out of the water. The girl pointed out that the pool was only one, and Bamin looked out the window and wondered where such a big demon had come from, but Xiaotian said that, unfortunately, it wasn't a demon. It turned out he was a deity. Bamin asked Aotian if he was certain he was a deity, because he could sense the evil emanating from him. Bamin then asked, how can a monster be a deity? Xiaotian replied, no, that in this world, not only demons exist, but also deities. Xiaotian clarified that this deity is infected with an evil aura. It must be because this deity possesses dark powers, otherwise, he wouldn't have been infected so easily. He thought that perhaps it was chaos energy, but no, he couldn't detect it. He recalled that this deity's aura smelled exactly the same as that of the beautiful teacher, and then Bamin realized that the place where the deity is located is the same as where the gym is. He jumped out of his seat and ran to save Jer. Xiaotian shouted after him that they couldn't. Defeating the deity with his current abilities, the deity itself began to howl loudly. Xiaotian guessed that it was suffering immensely. Suddenly, the deity, it began to open its jaws wide. It turns out it vomited onto the floor. The deity was in terrible pain, writhing as much as it could, and little by little, it began to disappear. Bam! Minji. Xiaotian couldn't understand what was happening. Xiaotian remembered that he had experienced the same sensation on the school campus before. This school seems to be the source of the problem. The school was almost completely destroyed, with most of it reduced to rubble and debris. Soon, some people arrived at the school grounds. Half a meter deep, hardly enough to play dead. Looking foolish, the boy said he was just joking, which made the girl angry. The teacher asked the boy. They cordoned off the entire building as a crime scene. One of the students tried to call 119, but one of the men snatched the phone away and ordered that no one make any calls. The phone issue will be resolved by the school soon. The boys started to get upset and demanded their phones back. Just then, Bamin ran by. Next to them, he yelled Jur's name. He had been captured because he wasn't allowed to be there. He kept repeating that Jur was still inside. Bamin bowed and pleaded to be allowed to pass. The man observing all of this notices that Bamin has a prosthetic limb. This child is disabled, after all. Bamin managed to escape the guard's clutches, but a second later, he was grabbed again by one of the guards. Bayman shouted that they were here, even without the basic rescue equipment. According to him, they weren't going to abandon Jer. A crowd of schoolchildren began to feel indignant about the behavior of the men who had. When the most important figure arrived, he told them to be quiet if they didn't want to die. Meanwhile, Bamin gathered his strength and gritted his teeth. The guard sensed that the brat was suddenly stronger. It was then that Xiaotian appeared and warned the protagonist about the consequences if he displayed his strength, couldn't continue at the school anymore. Bamin responded that there was no point in staying at school if Yer wasn't there. Following these words, a flash of light occurred, kicking up a large cloud of dust. Bamin assumed his demonic appearance and abruptly rose from his seat, with Yer shouting, "You have to wait for me," named Bamin if he was all right, and he said yes. When the teacher and Bamin ran into each other on the street, the teacher wondered why this small guy was the one who went on to attack the guards. They, in turn, couldn't comprehend whether that thick smoke and the earthquake had been caused by that disabled person. The second guard said they had to be extra vigilant. One of the guards spotted Bamin's silhouette through the smoke and immediately tried to grab him, but it turned out to be it was a fake created by Bamin. At the same time, Bamin took down one guard with a palm strike and punched the other guard in the stomach with all his might. He needed to hurry and eliminate all of those people. He couldn't let them stand in his way of saving Jer. The sounds of fighting and groans echoed. Bamin wasn't holding back. At the curtain were the last two guards. They were bitter, thinking their comrades were a bunch of useless trash, unable to. They couldn't even handle a high school student. One of them tried to pull out a gun, but the other stopped him, saying, "This is a school, don't. You can use weapons here, or you will be reprimanded by management. They came here in the first place just to warn people." The second guard took out a stun gun and said that it would be better to use it, but the first guard could no longer hear him, as he was under Bayman's control. The second guard saw him and hit Bamin in the neck with the stun gun. This gesture did absolutely no damage. Bamin asked the guard with a mocking smile on his face. That was the best he could do. Panicked, the guard shouted, not understanding how that was possible, and asked Bamin who he was. Bamin, in turn, responded that he. Quickly, the soldiers shout that the dark force has engulfed the city, but the general responds, "We will die, but we will defend our palace." They activated the C. Was attending his gym class. It turned out that he was disabled and had a prosthetic in place of a hand. The students couldn't understand why he kept going to the was just a disabled person. In that same second, the guard was knocked unconscious. After that, Bamin ran to the ruins. Xiaotian was already there and asked how things were going. It turns out that Xiaotian had already searched through the rubble and found 15 students who were struggling to breathe, but their vital signs were normal. If they weren't rescued, they could be injured further. But he's worried about something else, the malevolent aura that continues to emanate from beneath. This debris hasn't stopped. Bamin responded that they would take care of that later. For now, it was more important to save the people. He immediately, hurriedly began raking through the rubble with his bare hands, sending rocks flying left and right. The exhausted Bamin knew that the injured were in some nearby location. Gripping the concrete slab with his bare hands, he attempted to lift it using nearly all of his power, and he succeeded. Xiaotian, who was observing, this guy thought this brat was really putting up a good fight. This slab weighs at least 10 tons. Bamin managed to lift the slab up to his level of height. Then he managed to look under the rubble. There he saw Jer, who was sitting helplessly on the gym floor. He couldn't believe what his eyes saw. He could really see Bamin. The smiling Bamin replied that she shouldn't be afraid, that he was only here to save her. Finally, an ambulance arrived. The school principal was also on the scene. He set aside his entire meeting and came to find out what had happened. At that moment, Bamin was at school. The girl who pulled him out of the pool asked the two bullies if they were the ones who had pushed Bamin into the pool, helping his companions get out from under the rubble. The companions who had been safe all this time were pointing their fingers at him. They couldn't believe that Bayman had saved so many people. Everyone around us was talking about Bayman. How could it be? Bayman couldn't even walk. Normally, how could he have saved people? They were in disbelief. Finally, the doctors carried the wounded away on stretchers. The director turned to Bayman and thanked him. "Thank you on behalf of the teachers and students of the school." Embarrassed, Bayman replied that there had been a misunderstanding, and he was only helping Jer. He saved the others by accident, but the director still insisted that such actions were commendable. The remaining disciples also. They decided to support Bayman with applause. The director also explained that the incident occurred because of the recent renovation. It was probably the construction workers messed something up, and he also mentioned the uniformed people he had invited himself. The director apologizes for the conflict that they created at the scene. The teacher then told the children to go home, assuring them that the school would handle the incident appropriately. It turned out that Xiaotian kept his eyes fixed on those teachers. He wondered if this director possessed the same evil spirit as that other teacher. Xiaotian thought that there were other secrets hidden within this school that he couldn't yet see because of the evil spirit. Well, that's exactly the kind of thing that interests him, since at the pool, they naturally made excuses, claiming they wouldn't have dared to do such a thing. The girl's name was Shu Jur, and she was Baemin's personal bodyguard. Would help him unlock the rest of his abilities. At that moment, Jer was helping a girl to walk. Bamin asked him why he hadn't gone to the hospital. She said she only had a small bruise, nothing serious. This infuriated Baemin because Jer needed to be checked urgently to make sure she was okay. Alright, he would go with her. The girl who was helping Jer remarked that she was very lucky to have a boyfriend who cared so much about her. Jer blushed, and she thought that Baemin cared about her so much. Maybe there really were some feelings there. But no, he's just her friend. Then, Xiao Tian approached Baemin, telling him it was too early for them to leave and that they shouldn't let their guard down. He reminded Baemin that the deity had thrown something. Baemin thought for a while and remembered what the deity regurgitated. It was a monster. Xiao Tian said that if they ignored this case, many people would die in this school. Baemin, he shouted in horror, saying that he couldn't leave things as they were, but that he would help Yuer first, watching Baemin's back as Xiao Tian walked away. He reflected on the fact that Baemin was so young and already a leech. That same afternoon, in the park, there was a couple in love sitting near the Baemin fountain. The boy really wanted to kiss the girl, and he got up, saying he was going to the bathroom first. The boy asked the girl to come back soon, as he was very happy to be able to go out with such a pretty girl named Lily. He grew alarmed by the fact that Lily still hadn't returned. His classmates also asked Bamin if he was all right. After that, our protagonist turned around, thinking it could be worse than the fake. As he turned the corner of the building, he heard a noise. Thinking that his girlfriend had finally returned, and intending to kiss her immediately, he peeked around in the corner and told him to hurry, but just then, the girl who was possessed by the demon was staring at him. The girl responded that she could kiss him. The boy immediately started sweating. Before him, he saw a writhing monster with many mouths and a girl on top of it. She told the guy to come closer and kiss her. He hurried to run away, but he was grabbed by the neck. The girl reminded him that the boy wanted a kiss. He cried for help to be freed, but suddenly, another girl appeared. She uttered these words, "Let the ice lotus bloom, the one that blooms in the deadly field of ice." After these words, the hand of the monster that was holding the guy was severed by fragments of ice. The monster shouted, "Who has dared to do this?" The savior girl had arrived. Too late, she realized that the innocent girl had been consumed by a demon. She called this monster a poor cretin, and even he had to borrow someone's body to speak, and yet, he was carefully trying to find out the girl's name as he walked towards the monster. He pronounced, "This ice and snow will be the last thing you see." The monster shouted that he recognized her. "She is the queen of this school, and her name is Musu Mue." He remained silent, at his words, then said, "Yes." Those were his last words, and then, "Goodbye." And the girl began to form a sphere of ice that evolved into the shape of a sympathy. With these words, he was referring to all the greed and hypocrisy of his classmates, knowing they were only surrounding him to laugh behind his back. All of his sword called Winter Star. The monster did not expect the girl to be a night hunter, and surely a student like that would be someone from the house. Exhausted, Chongmin immediately rushed towards the monster, delivering countless blows and tearing it to pieces before landing epically on the ground. Showing their full power, Bamin and Xiaotian simultaneously rushed towards the sounds of battle, but they couldn't comprehend what had occurred. When the demon's aura suddenly vanished, Xiaotian guessed that someone had made the first move. Bamin was surprised. Were there really other people with unusual abilities at school besides him? Xiaotian responded that if demons and deities existed, why was he surprised at the unusual abilities of humans? But discerning friend from foe wouldn't be easy. They continued running, and Xiaotian knew there would be another obstacle ahead. Up ahead, Mu Suye was already waiting for them. Bamin also seemed to recognize the girl. He was standing in front of them, and beside him was a dead monster covered in ice. An excited Bamin wanted to shout her name, but when Mu Suye looked at him with her beautiful gaze, he wondered who she was. Xiaotian called out to Bamin and asked how he could have forgotten everything so quickly. He didn't understand it. Was Bamin really stupid, or was he pretending and doing it on purpose? Mu Yi said that Bamin smelled like a demon. He added that he had seen him save other people and even intended not to touch Bamin or life. Since childhood, he had suffered bullying and teasing, so he was used to it, but Bamin didn't have the same temperament and wasn't going to give up. Let him go. Bamin and Xiao Tian didn't understand what they were talking about. The girl continued talking, saying that Bamin was now out of luck, that he had. Having discovered his secret, she brandished her sword in front of him, adding that he had no choice but to die. Panicked, Bamin shouted that he didn't even know who she was. With a wave of her hand, the girl released a clot of ice and directed it straight at Bamin, right between his legs. "Why do you want to kill my banana?" he exclaimed, jumping away. Calling Bamin a cheeky boy, Mue continued attacking him, but Bamin dodged every attack. Bamin displayed excellent agility and coaxed Mue to stop and speak calmly. The girl was surprised that Bamin was able to dodge her attacks so well. After studying Bamin's movements thoroughly, the girl identified his weak point. With a cry of "It's over," she aimed her sword at his weak spot, but to no avail. Bamin was able to block the punch with her arm. This surprised Mu, who stopped the attack with his bare hands. That shouldn't be possible. The girl jumped back from Bamin, and when she looked at him again, she was astonished. Bamin stood up and looked at her student ID. Mue, just like our protagonist, attended high school. Anyway, the girl wondered how he managed to get a hold of her student ID. Tapping his palm, Bamin understood why. Mushu was so angry. He turned to Oyan and explained that Mushu was known as the Ice Goddess and was an influential figure in our school. So easily that same day on the basketball court, Bamin limped off somewhere and was walking when suddenly a ball rolled to his foot. School, but I've only heard rumors about her, and the truth is, I've never actually seen her, so she must be angry because I don't recognize her. After leaving, as Bamin's words rang in her ears, the girl admitted that she had underestimated him, stating that he was no longer such a weak demon. She added, "You forced me to unleash my true powers to fight you." Xiao Tian thought the girl's breathing sounded very familiar. He then realized it was Qin Nu. To him, the girl was becoming increasingly powerful. Bamin, confused, asked who Qin Nu was. Xiao Tian explained that Qin Nu was the god responsible for the cold and snow. Boy was surprised to learn that a goddess was attending his school. Just then, the girl pointed her finger at Bamin and declared, "Now I'm going to finish you off." At that very moment, the girl activated her superpower, Blizzard Ice Dance. A barrage of ice shards hurtled towards Bamin and Xiao Tian. Bamin. He tried to somehow dodge the razor-sharp chunks of ice, managing to bounce away from the ice avalanche as he tried to explain something to the girl, but it was all in vain. No matter how hard he ran, numerous ice fragments relentlessly chased after him. Panicked, he began calling out to Oyan for help. Since he had to think of something immediately, he didn't understand why Xiao Tian was ignoring him. Xiao Tian thought deeply to himself. Evil deities were already more than enough, so the fact that even humans could possess divine powers within them was overwhelming. This human world was too much. Two guys asked him to give the ball to them. He bent down to pick it up, but when he lifted it, the ball immediately fell again. It was all due to his crazy for him. In this kind of situation, where the information doesn't connect, it's too disadvantageous for him, especially since Bamin had already started to ask. Out of mercy, Xiao Tian overheard him, and disgusted that Kid had given in to the girl's relentless attacks, shouted, "Why do you keep dodging? What the hell are you afraid of? You just have to get up and attack." Bamin was already running through the building, and retorted that Xiao Tian had no manners. Men don't hit women. Girls. But the girl continued to attack Bamin. He wanted to see how long he could keep dodging. In a serious tone, Bamin replied, "She probably hasn't even realized it yet." Understood. He managed to deflect an attack, redirecting the shards of ice towards the girl. It was like lightning as he repelled the attacks one after another, gradually approaching Mushu, and there he was, standing right in front of her. He said, "Goddess, have mercy on me. I'm also here to get rid of the demon too." He added that we should be a little more lenient with others, and to not talk nonsense. He then placed his sword right on the bridge of Bamin, getting scared, was supposed to die. Bamin took it in stride, and blocked the punch with his arm. That stupid thing doesn't understand anything about nothing. Whatever about the guy I wanted to kiss, he was right behind them. Apparently, he was now under the control of the deity. He said he couldn't let it, would interfere. Musu was shocked, thinking to herself, she killed him. How could he have survived? The deity then appeared before them in all his splendor and spoke, "Beings." Prosthesis. Bamin was very nervous because he didn't want to be embarrassed. The boys yelled at him, pointing out that he was the former captain of the high school basketball team. Human, humble, even trying to fight against the deity. Xiaotian looked at him and couldn't understand why he had so much to do with deities today. Bamin. He asked Oyen if he knew him. Oyen said yes, whatever his name was, something like Tian. He didn't remember exactly what he was called. He just assumed that this deity had transformed from a snake to a dragon. And if that was the case, where was the head? Rising from his seat, Mui declared that whether he was a deity or a demon, as long as he brought harm to the world, he had to die. With those words, he rushed to attack the deity. As he delivered a flurry of punches, his sword broke easily. He wondered if the creature had scales that were that hard. When Musu turned his attention to the broken sword, the deity had already swung its tail at him. Thank goodness that. He managed to activate his shield in time to receive the blow, but the impact was so strong that the shield shattered into pieces. The girl was upset, since that was the limit of his divine powers. How could he possibly compare himself to a deity? He immediately lost consciousness and plummeted downwards, being carried all the way to the silhouette of a girl called out to her as her sister. But Bamin wasn't fooled and immediately ran to help. In a second, he had covered an impressive distance. Impressive, leaving a few strands of light trailing behind him. When he caught the girl, he told her not to be such an impulsive goddess. Bamin heroically held Mushu in his arms and said, "Leave this to the men." But the deity didn't care about his tenderness and roared against them with all of its might. When the high school and can't even catch the ball. Suddenly, a guy approached him. His name was Link. This guy questioned why Bamin staggers and limps around the doll. Girl was safely on the ground. He said, "Okay, I'll leave it to you." Bamin, along with Xiaotian, stood directly in front of the deity's mouth. Now, it was their turn to enter. Battle rushed towards his seat, screaming, but suddenly something went wrong. He tripped over something and ended up running all the way to the deity. Rubbing his face against the pavement, the deity didn't hesitate and struck Bamin with its paw. Mushue was terrified, thinking that Bamin was done for, and Xiaotian covered his eyes with his paw, not wanting to witness this humiliation. But there was no such luck. Bamin activated his super strength and withstood the entire attack from the deity, threatening that the jokes were over and that it had asked for it. He grabbed the deity by the tail and took off running, scratching so hard at the monster that it made him vomit, after which Bamin began to uncoil the monster by the tail with all his might, and soon, with tremendous force, he launched it straight into the sky, aiming directly at Mushu, and told her it was her turn. Mushu then activated her superpower by reciting a spell called Prison of Eternal Frost. The deity became encased in ice and began to crack. It was already clear that they had defeated it together. Xiaotian observed the girl and realized that she was capable of using advanced Qin-Nu spells. He wondered, what relationship does the Qin-Nu, frozen monster in the air, have with her? Soon, it began to fall, causing a loud crash. The monster was covered by a large ball of ice, but one of barrier, and the archers shot hundreds of arrows. Unfortunately, their attacks were completely ineffective. At that moment, something emerged from the ground. The school, looking like a clown. These words made Bamin a little angry, and he picked the ball up from the ground. Link said that the only thing he likes about Bamin is his. Them still doubted whether they could completely seal it. Bamin suggested simply leaving it there, saying it would be like a school sculpture. Musho replied that Bamin did not. He needed to worry about that later. The monster would be tracked and dealt with shortly. Bamin smiled and asked the girl if they could have a quiet chat. Now she called Bamin a little devil and said that they had nothing to discuss. If he disappeared from her sight immediately, she would pretend that she hadn't seen him. Bamin got angry, wondering why all the goddesses were so unpleasant. Xiaotian replied that he should be nice to them, but in reality, suddenly, there was a huge explosion behind them. The monster was free. The girl didn't understand how this was possible. No one had ever broken through his eternal prison of frost. Bamin realized the danger and yelled at Musu to be careful. Even so, he managed to push the girl away, but he himself was pierced by the monster's tongue. Monster Bamin crouched down in pain after the monster unleashed an attack on him. He pulled with all his might, transforming into a worm-like creature. Bamin. He became indignant, wondering why he was always the one getting hurt. Mushu ran to him and asked if he was okay. He said he was fine, but the deity seemed strange. Out of nowhere, a man emerged from the monster's mouth, continuing to approach Bamin and the others. The newly formed creature began to speak. In the human world, there's an ancient saying, "A small body hides a big soul." A male humanoid creature then appeared before them. The tenacity, and in that same second, he struck Bamin with the ball directly in the chest, telling him to stop pretending. Lin didn't understand what Bamin was trying to do, and when creature continued to philosophize. Bamin pounced on him, declaring that he also had an old saying, and struck the deity with all his might. He said that the villain died from talking too much. Unfortunately, Bamin's fist was intercepted by a deity. The deity responded that the demonic power the guy was using was actually very strong. However, it was all over. The deity began to envelop Bamin's arm with dark powers, thus breaking his bones. The guy's scream echoed throughout the area. On top of that, Bamin was attacked by all the offspring that the deity had. Our hero was suffering greatly. He could feel his strength leaving him. He realized that he did not have the strength and energy to fight his opponent, who was too strong. Now he understood what the deity was capable of. With a powerful blow, Bamin was sealed into the wall somewhere. Behind Xiaotian, he asked if he was still alive. Bamin replied that they would all have to die there today. How could a mere mortal possibly defeat such a deity? Powerful? Xiaotian felt disappointed in Bamin. He immediately seemed like a weakling to him. Alamu Bamin lay helpless on the ground, with all the bones in his body broken. He couldn't move at all, but suddenly his body began to be covered in ice. He asked Mushu what she was doing, who in turn told him that she was using ice to seal his body and reduce the internal bleeding. It could temporarily save his life. Turning his head, after they separated, he told him, "Run home, lie down on your cot, and accept your fate." Hearing these words, Bamin could only remain silent, but even so, he added that he shouldn't have interfered from the beginning, as this was not his battle. Bamin tried to stop her, saying he was just asking for his own death. He asked the girl to flee, saying he would somehow distract the deity. She responded that seeking her own death was the very purpose of her birth. Leaving Bamin behind, he headed straight for the deity. He could only watch as they grabbed Mushu, and his bones also cracked at that moment. At that moment, the deity had already crucified the girl and was wondering how he intended to defeat him. Bamin couldn't just stand by and called Xiaotian, "You smelly dog," and asked him to think of something. He was always bragging about how amazing and strong he was. There was only one way to allow Xiaotian's soul to enter Bamin's body. This would activate the strongest powers that Xiaotian possessed. Bamin couldn't completely trust Xiaotian, but there were no other options, especially with Musu practically suffocating. Action was necessary. He trusted Xiaotian and allowed him to take over his body. Kill the deity. Xiaotian was unspeakably happy to hear this. It was what he had been searching for so long. In that very second, lightning struck from the sky. Xiaotian took control of Bamin's body and infused it with power, rays of light emanating from him. The deity looked on, perplexed. Demonic powers of this kind had suddenly surged. Meanwhile, Xiaotian was getting closer and closer. He prostrated himself before the deity in all his glory, and Xiaotian, Bamin's frankness was more agreeable than the deceptive sympathy of his classmates. After class, Shu Yuer was waiting for him outside. Bamin had pronounced, "So, this is what it feels like to return the body." It turned out that Bamin had been deceived by Xiaotian all this time. Xiaotian had been controlling the amount of energy he gave to Bamin, thus reducing her strength. The deity got rid of the girl and turned to Xiaotian, asking her what she thought she was allowing, regardless of who he had become. With the words, "All men must die," he got into an attack position, but Xiaotian raised his hand, charging it with energy, and told him to open his eyes wide and see clearly who was in front of him. The deity was a little shocked, stuttering. Still, he managed to say that it was Boss Xiaotian who was in front of him. "Yes, yes," Xiaotian replied, adding, "Long time no see, Xiao Jua. Xiao Jua used to be so nice. How did you end up like this?" The deity replied, "Boss, it's because I didn't heed your words and left. I secretly went to the human world to play, but I was suddenly caught by those disgusting people. Not only did they cut off my head, but they even they imprisoned me." Xiaotian replied that if a deity was captured by humans, then it was indeed very useless. The deity wondered if Xiaotian wanted to join forces and take revenge on those people. Xiaotian replied, "What the hell is that about revenge?" thus deceiving the deity. Xiaohua laughed and continued, "For people as weak and insignificant as him to use the word revenge, then it is truly pathetic." Lowering his head, the deity asked, "Does that mean you don't?" She had forgotten her umbrella and wanted to go home with him. She showed Bamin so much attention because he had protected her when she was a child. They walked quietly down the street. "Want to join me?" Biting his finger with his teeth, Xiaotian replied that, to turn this world upside down, he alone was enough. This did not anger the 18 Zybal. If the Psi deity wanted to join forces with him, Xiaotian had better not interfere with his revenge. Otherwise, Don't blame him. That was the response. The Xiaotian deity stood there, revealing his full demonic potential. He was amused by the fact that the deity wanted to fight him, especially since they were old acquaintances. Xiaotian was hesitant to let him go, but now it no longer seemed necessary. Although he would not return the body to Bamin, he still promised him that he would take care of this deity. Licking his lips, he added that he would let the deity become his food. A dog-like spirit immediately ran towards the deity. The deity managed to withstand the blow. He was confident that he would defeat Haotian, after which he aimed his snakes at Xiaotian. This gesture, it only amused Xiaotian, but things didn't go as planned, and the deity looked at Xiaotian in fear because Xiaotian had released the ghost messengers from his body. Xiaotian replied that there was nothing special about it. He had only devoured a few ghost messengers. It wasn't a problem for him, as he had once traversed all 18 levels of hell to devour Yan Luo. He had even ascended to the heavens to devour the gods and Buddha, saying everything was so delicious. P.S. Yan Luo is the king and protector of the underworld. The deity shouted that they would see who was stronger, and then began to accumulate an asama. But Bamin was grabbed by the shoulder by an indignant man. The man began screaming that his arm was broken. The man's friends grabbed Bamin, and energy bubble in the center of his belly. Xiaotian's son laughed at such a statement, and immediately formed a sphere in his mouth, then spat it out. If it were a gunshot, the yellow orb struck precisely where the deity's energy mass converged, which happened to be a part of the solar flame, thereby extinguishing the fire spewing from his mouth. Wielding Musu's ice sword, Xiaotian retorted that the solar flame component became significantly more flammable the moment it was bitten into. Musu awoke, clutching her head, completely bewildered by the unfolding events. Before her stood Iotian, whom she initially mistook for Bamin, though his aura felt different than before. She remained behind the scenes, merely observing as the ghost messengers scorched the deity. The deity, at that very moment, was emitting horrifying screams that made one's hair stand on end. Xiaotian yelled, "He won't recover that easily," and channeled his dark powers too. The deity needed the energy clot it had previously created in order to take something. A second later, it was already in the deity's hand. He uttered, "Xiaohua, your hatred is so strong that I cannot ignore it. Furthermore," he said, "I believe I understand your pain, so I will allow you to become a part of me right now." Xiaotian intended to swallow the sphere. After doing so, he felt a surge of energy. He really liked the taste of divinity. Upon seeing all of this, Musu became very scared. As if Aotian smelled the scent of another deity and intended to devour her as well, he approached Mushu. If you look closely, they began to threaten him, and the man even pulled out a knife. Surprisingly, Bamin showed no fear. This group turned out to be nothing more than common thieves. Girl is quite attractive. It would be a shame to devour her just like that. He lowered his head towards her and asked her to become his wife, saying that she could control him, carving her own destiny. Pushing Xiaotian aside and directing an icy pulse at him, she asked what he was saying. This amused Xiaotian, who thought that human women were truly strange creatures. He could hear the girl's heart beating rapidly. If she says no, her body says the opposite. With a scream, she tells him to close his mouth. She tried once again to attack Xiaotian with her icy pulse. He appeared before her without any fear. She must have misunderstood him. He wasn't asking him to become his wife, he was ordering him, shouting, "You arrogant bastard, I'm going to finish you off." She lunged at him, but everything was even. Xiaotian blocked her punch without any difficulty, after which he bowed her over, and immediately, it was a very beautiful sight. The girl began to realize that Xiaotian was being drained of her energy, and her strength began to fail her. It's at that moment that we see Bamin somewhere within Xiaotian's subconscious. He was bound by chains that restricted his movement. It turned out that Xiaotian had locked his own mind with a chain. Addressing Xiaotian, Bamin said, if Xiaotian thought he had captured her body forever, he was sorely mistaken. Bamin tried to break free with all of her strength, but the chains held him back with great force. After Xiaotian appeared, he told Bamin to listen to him. He wouldn't actually kill him. All he needed was to. One of the men put a knife to Jer's neck, saying that a pretty girl like her must mean a man like him had money. Completely take over his body, because only then would he be able to obtain powerful strength. Bamin was so angered by Xiaotian's betrayal that he was ready to kill him on the spot. Even so, his inner rage took its toll, and Bamin broke the chain. Xiaotian couldn't understand how it was possible, how he was able to break free. No, it was as if he had lent him his strength, but it was truly his own. Brutally walking towards Xiaotian, Bamin said that he needed to train the dog. That's where I'm going to end up. So, guys, if you enjoyed this video and want a part 2, let's aim for 1,000 likes on this video. Also, please subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and leave a comment down below. See you in the next video. He must have money. Bamin agreed to give them all his money if they would just let them go. One of the thieves said they would only let them leave if Bamin took off his clothes and stripped naked. That would be the punishment for his insolence. Bamin realized he had to protect Jer, and he knew what he had to do. He took off his clothes and threw them too. Soldiers had already begun to flee, but the general stopped them with a threat of death, and just then, an enormous hand burst forth from beneath the earth. The sidewalk. When the robbers saw his body, they immediately started making jokes, saying he looked like Iron Man. When they searched his clothes, they found his wallet, but it only contained $100. They took notice of Bamin's prosthetics, which appeared quite expensive, and at that very moment, Bamin's mechanical arm was ripped right off. One of the thieves sensed some kind of trick from Jer, and rightfully so, because in an instant, Jer elbowed him in the jaw. The thief went flying towards the wall. Getting into a fighting stance, the girl threatened the thief, demanding Bamin hand over her belongings, but of course, no one was willing to listen to her. She immediately stabbed Bamin in the back with his own prosthetic, continuing to mock the guy, calling him pathetic. After a brief scuffle, the female thief was beaten. Jer approached her and held out a knife. Bamin couldn't watch this calmly and decided to take action, pushing one of the guys, and immediately lunged at the other man, striking him in the face with the remainder of his prosthetic limb. Feeling a sharp pain, he turned his head and saw that a knife was lodged in his back. He started coughing up blood and began to lose consciousness. The last thing he saw before dying was his favorite girl, Yuger. They showed him glimpses of his past life. He remembered his mother and her agonizing death. His life was filled with anguish and many terrible events. But, suddenly, a bolt of lightning appeared in the sky, the very same lightning from the celestial lands. Like blades, it sliced through the night sky and plunged into the ground. As you may have, a voice rang out, and the hand commanded the soldiers to retreat to the dark side. They had lost all hope and resigned themselves to defeat. But suddenly, this beam of light struck Bamin directly. His body began the process of reincarnation, and the thieves at that moment couldn't comprehend what was happening, passing by. But Bamin no longer cared about anything. As he absorbed more and more energy, a new power began to form in the place of his hand. Bamin appeared in front of us in the most beautiful way imaginable. His body was overflowing with power, and he seemed to have become the new master of Xiaotian, which made the thieves wonder what it was. Crouching low, Bamin began to invoke demonic force, and it seemed that Xiaotian was good at it. Something strange began to happen behind the back of one of the thieves, which caused him great surprise. Seized by panic, he grabs his hand and realizes that he can't feel it, as Bamin extracted all the vital force from the thief's hand. The second robber knocked the knife out of his hand and desperately claimed that he had nothing to do with it, insisting that he was just passing by. When Bamin realized, upon returning, the third thief exclaimed, "Who the hell are you? Where did you get that power from?" "I am the great Tian Geiyu," he replied. Bamin no longer cared about anything else. He only wanted to deal with the criminals. The thief then claimed that he was also a demon, and that everything had been a misunderstanding. He realized that it was better to surrender, because Bamin's demonic energy was far too great. The thief was already prepared to die, but Bamin simply walked past him. The thief then asked if he had been saved, but it turned out to be the exact opposite. He ended up being devoured by a monster. At that moment, Bamin was getting closer to Yuer, who, a clear bolt of lightning descended from the sky and destroyed the hand. It turned out to be a legendary spear. The owner of this spear was the legendary god Arlen, and his pet wolf was very scared and tried to bring Bamin back to his senses. When he got extremely close, he had an evil smile plastered on his face. The girl continued to call out his name, waiting for Bamin to come to his senses, but he paid no attention and opened his demonic mouth wide. It looked like he was about to eat Jer. He must have eaten him, because a terrible scream was heard outside. Bamin is dreaming. In the dream, he is upset that, instead of celebrating a festive dinner, he had to go to the temple with his mother. His mother interrupts him and tells him to be quiet. They prayed to Buddha. The only thing the boy asked for was that his mother would be safe and sound at all times. But at that very moment, the dream shifts back to when they were falling off the cliff. There was a massive explosion as he continued dreaming. Lad didn't understand why he kept dreaming the same thing. Someone behind Bamin's back uttered an irreligious phrase. Dismayed, Bamin exclaimed, "Who is it? Who's there?" it turned out to be. Xiaotian was telling Bamin that his so-called god no longer existed. In a panic, Bamin asked who was speaking to him, but the demon responded that he didn't need to know, as Bamin was going to be his meal. At that moment, the dream was interrupted. Bamin woke up in a hospital bed, drenched in a cold sweat. He immediately realized he was in a hospital, because the smell was all too familiar. He hoped that he had only been dreaming about the monster from his dream, but it turned out to be the exact opposite. The Xiaotian wolf was standing directly over Bamin's hospital bed, opening its mouth wide. Xiaotian demanded, "What the hell have you done to me?" When our protagonist saw the monster in his hospital room, he hid under the sheets, terrified. Xiaotian became enraged by this. Xiaotian was utterly shocked to discover that dark forces had infiltrated nearly the entire heavenly territory. Xiaotian exclaimed, "You have done this to me." When our protagonist saw the monster in his hospital room, he hid under the sheets out of fear, and Xiaotian got angry because of this. His behavior, and repeated the question, but Bamin screamed hysterically, claiming he had done nothing. Xiaotian was not satisfied with this answer, because he had lost his physical body, and his divine power had merged with this boy. He didn't believe Bamin's claim that he hadn't done anything. Approaching Bamin, Xiaotian said, "If you don't, tell me the truth. I swear I will cut your throat." All Bamin could do was make excuses and insist that he knew nothing. Even so, Xiaotian left Bamin behind. Realizing that he was too despicable a person to do something like that, Xiaotian felt a bit resentful that Arlen had sent him to the human world. Then he looked out the window and declared that he wouldn't miss the opportunity to devour the human world, and he would worry about heaven later. Turning his head, he spoke to Bamin, telling him he would eliminate all the creatures and save Bamin for dessert. While still threatening Bai, he flew out through the window. But suddenly Xiaotian sensed something strange. A necklace had appeared around his neck. It turned out that a chain extending from Bamin's room was tied directly to Xiaotian's collar, preventing Xiaotian from escaping. With tremendous force, he was pulled flying out the window. Back in the first room, Xiaotian looked at Bamin and speculated that they might be connected by a spiritual seal. He couldn't even imagine how Bamin had managed to seal that something was approaching. It turned out to be an enormous Buddha statue. The soldiers exclaimed that even Master Buddha had appeared, and that surely now, his divine power, calling Bamin wretched. Xiaotian didn't give up hope of breaking free from his chains, but suddenly Bamin grabbed his head. He thought about his Yuger's favorite girl began to have terrible flashbacks to yesterday, the last time he had seen her, and then he realized that he had been the one who ate her. Xiaotian approached Bamin and asked if he was the one he ate, or if it was the girl in question. Sticking out his tongue and licking his teeth, he said, "She tasted very good." Bamin was horrified by these words. Xiaotian excused himself by saying he was very hungry and couldn't help himself. He added, "Those girls really care a lot about Bamin." After hearing these words, Bamin jumped up, suddenly resenting his useless life. After that, he immediately turned to Oyan and asked him who he was and just how strong Xiaotian really was. He couldn't believe that this guy didn't recognize him and immediately decided to introduce himself. He told him that he was a great absorber and held the title of the strongest demon in the 3 realms. And Bamin clarified once again, "You are a danger to humanity." Xiaotian, laughing, replied that yes, he is a threat of universal proportions. Bamin wanted to teach Xiaotian a lesson for showing off, so he went outside window and wanted to jump. Xiaotian was very angry because he knew that if Bamin died, he wouldn't survive either. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Xiaotian was already being much kinder, but it was too late. Bamin jumped off the windowsill and began to fall. Bamin showed his middle finger towards Oyan, hoping that his